Good morning, everyone. Staffordshire Police and Crime Panel, Monday the 24th of June, and it's midday. We're here for a confirmation hearing regarding the Commissioner's Deputy, who we understand to be Mr. David Evans. This meeting is being webcast. I'll now invite the Commissioner if he would like to open with any comments.
Thank you, Chairman. Just before I do, and I introduce you to David, just a comment, if I may, about my previous Deputy, Helen Fisher, who sends her regards to you all. Helen was absolutely tremendous as a Deputy in my previous 3-year term. Really got stuck into road safety and roads policing in particular, but also provided me with much needed support and advice along the way, and I certainly wish her the best wherever she is in the world. She was tremendous. So it's a tough act to follow. David Evans has been a friend of mine and a colleague in politics, but also in terms of advice, talking about issues that matter for several years. In fact, getting on for nearly 10 years now. In my view, Dave is, like the very best councillors, somebody who's extremely close to his local residents, always listening to them. As such, he has the experience not to always think he knows the answer before he's heard the question. And in that view, I think that's an important part of being a deputy, and particularly in this role. You hear some difficult stuff along the journey with police and fire. Some of the most awful things happen. And quite often you have to step back and wait to hear all the facts before you comment publicly or jump to a conclusion. And I think he's got the patience and experience to do that. I won't talk too much about his experience. I'm sure he can take you through that himself. But suffice to say, his understanding of the north of Staffordshire is particularly helpful. I've spent a number of years up there myself campaigning and working in education and as a parliamentary candidate, but I'll never know it as well as Dave does. I think between the two of us, we probably know every corner of our beautiful but enormous county, which is an advantage. I'm going to leave it there for now. He can more than speak for himself and take some questions, but I think the key in this role for me is somebody who is not afraid to ask questions, provide a different perspective, and to challenge my view, but also the thoughts of my team. And in the first few weeks prior to this meeting, he's already stepped up into that space, which is greatly to his credit. So, Chairman, if I may, yes. I'll pass you over to David.
Well, before we start then, Commissioner, thank you for that. I may have jumped the agenda there, but item 1 on the agenda is apologies.
We've received apologies from Councillor Merrick.
Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest? None? Right, thank you. Item 3 on the agenda is consideration of the appointment of a Deputy Commissioner to receive representations from the Commissioner on the criteria to be met by the proposed appointee. I think you've started off, Commissioner. Is there anything else you wish to add?
I think I've covered it. I'm sure my preferred candidate will more than explain the rest of the detail.
Okay, well, welcome, Mr. Evans. I won't be so rude as to say keep it brief, but we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Chairman, and I will keep it brief. You'll be very pleased to know. So my name is David Evans. I've lived in Staffordshire all my life. I live in Stoke-on-Trent with my partner and my daughter, and I'm from North Staffordshire, born and bred. I studied geography at Staffordshire University in Urban Development. And like lots of people, I got to university without really knowing what I wanted to do past university, really, and discovered while I was there that the thing that really interests me, or people really interest me, and specifically life chances. And I believe in a fundamental view of fairness, as I see it, that everyone deserves the opportunity to make the most of their lot in life, and that includes living in a safer place and being supported to do that. I first got elected to Stoke-on-Trent City Council in 2015. So good 9 years ago now. I was only 12 at the time, despite my youth. And I've done a number of roles while I've been on the council, Chairman. I was Chairman of the Planning Committee. I was Vice Chair of one of the scrutiny committees around adults and neighbourhoods, which also included health. The reason I mention it is because it took me out of my comfort zone. I didn't know a great deal about health, but when there were only 7 Conservative councillors in Stoke, we had more seats than we had councillors. So it was one of those challenges to have. And at the time, the local CCG, as it was then, was actually going under a programme of closing or proposing to close community hospitals. In fact, I know some faces from that campaign back then. And again, it taught me, as I got a little bit older, the importance of asking questions. Because if you don't understand something, quite often people will just sit there very silently. And I asked a lot of questions and formed a view and worked with partners, worked cross-party to oppose those plans because I thought it was very important. Subsequently to 2019, I became the Cabinet Member for Children and Young People on Stoke-on-Trent City Council, which I did for 4 years. One of the most rewarding roles you could ever have, I would tell you, to be the Cabinet Member for Children's Services in any council, particularly Stoke-on-Trent. Just prior to my taking the role, we had received an Ofsted inspection, which found us to be inadequate. In fact, if you read it, it's one of the most damning reports you'll ever read. In fact, it's tragic, actually. And the fact that Stoke-on-Trent had never had any good ratings in anything when it came to children's services made it worse. I was asked to become the portfolio holder, which I did. The experience it gave me around partnership, there's an old adage, isn't it, that it takes a village to raise a child. Well, services of all persuasions, public, private, charity, come into contact with children. And actually 4 years of driving change across the children's social care system in Stoke-on-Trent taught me about building coalitions of the willing, I think is probably fair to say. That's a skill set that I think is absolutely needed in a deputy. I think it's really important to apply yourself and be able to work with partners to make the difference that you want to make. I'm very pleased to say in Children's Services in 2022, we were found to be improved. It requires improvement to be good, but specifically rated as good for children in care and care leavers. The reason I mention it is because I think that's very much a value judgment, really. How you deal with children in your care is incredibly important. I think it says a lot about your organisation, and I'd like to think it said an awful lot about my values and those of my colleagues. Outside of politics, I have worked for charities. I was a fundraising officer for a charity for some time. And again, that was about building partnerships with philanthropic donors, but also businesses, making sure that we were able to drive money into the charity, first of all, to pay the bills, but continue to do the work that we wanted to do. And similarly, prior to entering politics, I worked in the private sector around sales training, sales development, and getting people ready to sell stuff. And the big challenge around that, when you're running a sales team, Chairman, there's not always a very transferable skill, but it does show you how to be data-driven. When you're running a call centre and you're running a team in a call centre, you need to understand what your data is telling you. You need to understand how you can use it. But equally, and someone made the point earlier in the meeting you had this morning, you also need to value the anecdotal evidence or the lived experiences of people to also understand what that data tells you and how you drive things forward. As I said, I'm 34 years old and I think I've got a fair bit of experience. I've been in public office now for nearly a decade. And I do believe that experience would be beneficial in the role of the deputy, and I'm happy to take any questions, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. That was a detailed, comprehensive summary. If I may just start the conversation with you. I know you talked about your work in Stoke there, but what about working with ethnic minorities? Again, in my corner of the woods in East Staffordshire, with a very, very diverse community. What particular challenges do you see, and how would you go about ensuring that your messages are getting through, and more importantly, in the context of people being able to trust you?
Thank you, Chair. So we're quite lucky in the respect that you and I come from very similar sort of areas. Stoke-on-Trent is probably the most diverse part of the county, only just being a city of 250,000 people. And it's been quite interesting, actually, during my time on the council, how the council tried to reach out, and we tried to reach out through various mediums to different groups. So we have a big Kashmiri population, for example, in Stoke-on-Trent. So when it came to things like the COVID pandemic, of course I was on the cabinet during that, we had to look at how we gave messages to get those communities to buy into, whether it was vaccines, whether it was tests, that sort of thing. So that included things like getting our our fellow Kashmiri councillor actually going out and giving some of the videos in Urdu alongside the Director of Public Health, so that you've got both sides of that. I think you also mentioned trust, and trust is incredibly important. I think trust is built up over time. It's not something that you can force, it's not something you can demand, and it's certainly not something you can order. And I think you can trust through someone's record of delivery ultimately. And when it comes to different populations, the record of delivery is expressed through the way you communicate with them ultimately. So that's why that communication piece is absolutely key. The other thing I'd very much touch on, during my time on the Cabinet, one of the big challenges for Stoke-on-Trent and all councils is foster care recruitment. It's a real challenge. You want as many foster carers as you can because you want every child to have a loving home. You don't want them in a care home. You want them supported where that is ever possible. And particularly when you have children coming into the care system from different ethnic backgrounds, different cultures, and you want them to have an element of their culture as they grow up, because ultimately they want to understand where they come from. So I've done quite a lot of that work in terms of getting groups to trust me, for lack of a better word, but also to work with me in terms of common goals. I think it's a real challenge. It's something that takes time, Chair, but I think it's absolutely something I'm committed to doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, any questions? Charlotte?
Good afternoon. What lessons have you learnt from Staffordshire Police going into special measures, and how would you use those lessons in your new role?
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Atkins. Reading the HMI report, I sort of took the same approach as I did with Ofsted. Actually, you read the report, and I think that almost becomes your blueprint for moving forward. So you answer some of the issues, so whether that be the issues around DV, whether it's the issues around children's safeguarding, which at the time of that HMI report, I was the Cabinet member in Stoke, so I have a slight advantage. I saw it from the other side, I guess, from that perspective, about how you drive that forward and how you work with the force to be constructive, to show leadership where you can, and also to hold them to account on those key metrics. I think the other thing that's quite important, though, is to understand that a HMI report or an Ofsted report or anything like that is partly a moment in time. And actually, just getting out of Engage or just getting requires improvement to be good isn't enough. I was often quoted as good isn't good enough in Stoke, and it was kind of my mantra for my time on the Cabinet, because it is about how you become an outstanding organisation. And that goes back to your values, I think, and that goes back to leadership in terms of you setting a tone as a leader, making sure your Chief Constable or your Chief Fire Officer is doing exactly the same. I think Staffordshire Police, I think it's fair to say, if you read the HMI, culturally was in a difficult position. I think they got themselves set over time. And somebody, again, mentioned in the meeting earlier about how if you don't constantly refresh things, if you don't constantly look at culture, it can fester. And it can, we see it in organisations going downwards. So I would apply those same rules as I did with Ofsted. I'd show that leadership, holding the officers to account with regard to the HMI, but also more generally, making sure that we're monitoring the metrics that matter to the public, that matter to us giving an outstanding service, whether that be 101, for example, whether that be response times. Because the other key thing, just to say very quickly, I kind of believe in local accountability, and absolutely right that we have statutory timescales and all the rest of it, but actually I want the best force possible for Staffordshire ultimately. And that goes down to the lived experiences of our residents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Question from that side, please.
This side, yes. It's a lonely side.
It's a lonely side.
Thank you for that information. Clearly you've got a lot of very useful and relevant experience, but taking on this role, could I ask you which areas of that role you think you will find the most challenging?
Thank you. It's a really good question. I think one of the things I'm really interested in about being the deputy is around the community safety partnership space. Partly because I understand the partnership element, but it's also a challenge because I've seen those partnerships from the other side. And I think it's understanding that every organisation has its own view of partnership work, and quite often it's you do what I'd like you to do, and that's the way partnership should work. I think it's about parking that a little bit, listening to the advice, but also working collegiately with different areas. I think the other key challenge for me, I know North Staffordshire like the back of my hand. I do. I'm not as familiar with the south of the county, is an honest answer. I'm not as familiar with those communities. I'd like to get out more, speak to parish councils, community groups, residents associations, because I think it is important that I get up to speed with some of the challenges that they are facing. Some of them will be very similar to what we have in Stoke-on-Trent. Some of them will be very, very different. I come from a very urban area, of course. And so if you go down to some parts of Lichfield, South Staffordshire, which are more rural in character, it's been lovely campaigning in them actually. It's been a nice change, but it's also a real challenge because it's not a community I would know as well.
Okay. David.
Thank you, Chair. Is there a particular focus to your role as deputy? Is there some projects or certain things that you want to tackle over the next years? Thank you.
Thank you. I think, as I mentioned, the community safety partnership space, I know that's really important to the Commissioner, and it's something that I see immense value in. I think if you look at some of the perception surveys, we see often the public say that they want assurance from the force and the partnership more generally, and I think we can all agree that public sector partnerships are never where you would want them. It's a constant evolving picture to really drive partnerships and change. And also, particularly, if you look at the community safety partnership point, I think someone said earlier, 40% of that is the police. Some of it isn't as well, and how you get partners more engaged in that. I also think the work that my predecessor did on safer roads, I think is the equivalent of 2 jumbo jets a year get killed on our roads in Britain. Now, if two big planes were dropping out of the sky every single year, we'd probably do something about that. I think we need to do more on road safety. And that's about, again, engaging those communities, things like community speed watch, but also making sure things are joined up, whether that be the motorway policing unit, the roads policing unit, and all the different facets of that. I think there's a lot we could do there, actually, and it's something that really interests me.
Question from this side again. That side, right?
Thank you. You've talked a lot about your experience in the city areas. What about the rural areas? Do you see the rural areas as having different problems? And if so, how would you go about trying to make sure that you can help in the rural areas as much as you do in the city areas? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's an area I need to do more work on, is the honest answer. I think that's one of my bigger challenges, as I mentioned. But I also think some of that is a bit of a perception thing. So one of the things I was quite struck by talking to some farmers recently, if you have your car stolen, and I did 2 years ago, not in Staffordshire, just to clarify, but I did have my car stolen a couple of years ago, I know how awful that was. But I had a partner to take me around all the rest of it. If you're a farmer and someone takes your plant and your equipment, that's not just the way you get about, that's the way you make your money, that's the way you earn your living. That's a fundamental problem in your life, a huge, massive problem in your life. So I think some of that is understanding. There'll be a lot more examples of that I'm not aware of, and understanding that a little bit. I think giving it the time and the energy. So I think the problems are slightly different in rural areas. And also I think the solutions to some of them are slightly different. You know, neighbourhood watch, for example, that you could have in a city where everyone lives in quite a compact space is very easy to do. In a more rural community, I live less than half a mile from the moorland, so if you go out towards Flash, people might live half a mile apart. So I think it's about how you understand the problems a little bit and find appropriate solutions. And I think it's also how you listen to the residents there, because it is very labour intensive to go around to villages, but it's something I'm quite up for doing, because I think it's really important to speak to people and understand it from their lived experience as well. The data will tell you a story, and that story is absolutely relevant, but lived experience will also give you context to that story, and I think that's how you build a picture of any area, any challenge, but particularly with sort of rural areas.
Okay. Question?
Thank you, Chair. I think with a county as varied as Staffordshire, with Stoke-on-Trent in it as well, there are going to be a lot of competing demands and a lot of situations where inevitably things will need to be prioritised. So I'm going to ask as open a question as I can on this one. How do you see yourself making those decisions about prioritising things?
Thank you. I think that's a very open question. Well, that's fair enough. I think one of the things I find really, really interesting, it's why I sort of focused on community safety partnerships, actually. So those partnerships are on, obviously, a borough and district level, and they should be very responsive to the local need. As I said, some of that will be the same, so antisocial behaviour, I can guarantee, will be in every local community safety partnership, but other challenges, like, for example, rural crime, won't feature in Stoke-on-Trent, but it may well feature, I'd imagine, in the moorlands in other parts. So I think it's how you build that partnership around the community safety partnerships to really get to the core of what are the priorities for those local areas, and how we therefore hold the force to account for dealing with some of those challenges, and partners too, to be fair. I think the other key thing with that is understanding, when you have got a county as varied as Staffordshire, again, what those local voices are telling you. I think that's why the community safety partnership really attracts me, actually, because I think you can't have a pan-Staffordshire strategy because it would be literally everything to everybody. I have a particular dislike for health and wellbeing boards for that reason, because it's literally everything for everybody. But those community safety partnerships really can, I think, drive effective community change, and in a way that people see, incidentally, as well, done right. And I think there's a lot of room to do a lot more work there.
Okay, thank you. Right, perhaps one final question from myself, having listened to everything you've said. I'm getting words like innovation and the need for a pace of change, because the Commissioner's let us clearly understand the pace that he works at and what he wants to achieve. So what will success look like from your perspective? I mean, there's a good old phrase, in the first 100 days or in the first 6 months. Just a general answer to that would be helpful, please.
That's generally my favourite question that people ask at interviews. You'd always ask what success looks like. I think that's down to the lived experiences of people and understanding that we have a force with improving services. Yes, on the statistics, they're absolutely key, but also that people feel that change, and that comes down to your feedback through your crime surveys, through your community safety partnerships, and ultimately through what local representatives are telling you. Because if their communities are not happy, you can make sure their councillors know it. I think so. It's about understanding that, yes, we are dealing with crime. People feel safer, but also that people feel that we're dealing with crime. I think it's that seeing is believing. And that assurance piece, certainly if you read the perception surveys, the most recent one, that comes over really strongly to me. So I think it's that, Chair, really, making sure that people feel the change, but also that is happening in the background too.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, one final go, any more? No? Right, okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Evans. We'll adjourn and deliberate, and we'll be back shortly. Thank you. Colleagues, can we go into the back room over here? We've had an interesting conversation in the back office, as they say, and we would like to respond to you by saying that we recognise the points Mr. Evans made, re the importance of partnership working successfully, and the need and the importance again of developing that. And we hope that we'll be able to see some clear evidence of that as your role develops and becomes embedded. The panel unanimously have agreed to the appointment of Mr. Evans as Deputy Crime Commissioner, and we wish you all the very best, and we look forward to seeing you on several occasions in the future. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you. And thank you to everyone for attending, and at that point I'll close the meeting. Thank you.